Let's talk about one of the most important and most expensive decisions brands make as they grow: partnering with an agency versus hiring in-house. Every founder hits this crossroads. Marketing is working, but it feels fragile. Growth feels possible, but not predictable. And someone asked the magic question: should we just hire internally? That question sounds responsible. It sounds like you're leveling up. And it sounds like real company behavior. And sometimes it is the right move. But more often than not, that decision is made emotionally, not strategically. And it quietly slows growth, increases stress, and locks brands into structures they aren't ready for. So in this video, I want to break down the real pros and cons of partnering with an agency versus hiring in-house, role by role, and without pretending one option is always right. This will lean toward agencies in certain areas, not because agencies are magical and always the right answer, but because experience compounds and most brands dramatically underestimate just how expensive learning curves really are. For context, I'm Aaron, co-founder of 3 Beacon Marketing. For the last decade, my co-founder and I have worked with direct-to-consumer brands across health, wellness, and lifestyle, helping generate over 9 figures in revenue. We've seen a lot. We've seen lean teams outperform bloated ones, brands overhire themselves into pure chaos, and companies bring everything in-house and somehow everything gets worse. So this isn't theory. This is what happens when payroll, cash flow, and real pressure are involved. Before we talk about roles, there's the principle that everything comes back to. In-house teams create ownership, agency partnerships create leverage. In-house teams give you deep brand understanding, long-term alignment, and internal accountability. Agencies, on the other hand, give you speed, pattern recognition, and perspective you cannot generate from inside one single business. If you expect one to replace the other, you're going to be disappointed. The brands that scale cleanly don't pick sides. They sequence correctly. So let's go role by role, starting with paid acquisition, Meta, Google, TikTok ads. This is where mistakes get expensive fast. Let's start with the upside of an in-house media team. In-house media buyers have real advantages. They live inside the business. They understand the margins, inventory constraints, fulfillment realities, and cash flow pressure. They're not just optimizing for return on ad spend, they're optimizing for the business. When this works, it's powerful. Decisions happen faster, and context is baked in. Over time, the company builds internal ownership of growth instead of outsourcing its brain. That's real value. Here's the problem most founders don't see coming, though. You're almost always hiring one person, and you're expecting that one person to manage multiple platforms, interpret noisy data correctly, guide creative strategy, scale budgets responsibly, and not blow up cash flow. That's not a role, that's a whole department. What usually happens is you get someone who's really good at one platform or one stage of growth, and guessing everywhere else. Now, your entire acquisition engine is built on one person's experience ceiling. That's risky, especially if you're still figuring out what actually scales. Now, on the agency side, a good agency does far more than just run ads. Yes, they implement. They manage campaigns day to day. They handle pacing, testing, and optimization. But more importantly, they bring clarity. They help you decide what to test, when to scale, and when not to touch anything at all. They pressure test decisions before you make expensive mistakes. And here's the part most people miss. Agencies bring external perspective you literally cannot have internally. They've seen what breaks at $1 million, what stalls at $3 million, and what collapses at $10 million, and what actually scales beyond that. They've watched dozens of brands react to platform updates, creative fatigue, overscaling, supply chain issues. So when an agency says, "Don't do that yet," it's not an opinion, that's pattern recognition. Now, where do agencies fail? Agencies fall apart when juniors are running your accounts, reporting replaces thinking, communication gets filtered through layers. If you don't know who's actually touching your account, that's a red flag. So what's the best model for paid ads? At early to mid-scale, agency leads acquisition and strategy, internal teams own constraints and priorities. At later stages, in-house maintains, agency supports testing and creative velocity. Paid ads benefit from leverage first, ownership second. Now let's talk about retention, email, and SMS marketing. This is where brands think they're fine, and usually they aren't. So what are the strengths of in-house retention? Retention works well internally because brand voice matters, customer nuance matters, long-term learning compounds. A strong in-house retention hire can become incredibly valuable over time because they understand the customer at a deep level and can evolve messaging with the brand. Now, where in-house retention stalls, and this trap is subtle, is internal retention often turns into campaign sending, calendar management, and blasting discounts. Email exists, but there's no real system behind it. No life cycle mapping, no segmentation logic, no revenue forecasting, and really that's not retention, that's noise. Now on the agency retention side, good retention agencies don't just send emails. They architect systems, they identify revenue leaks quickly, they prioritize flows based on impact, not gut feeling, and they help brands understand why retention is underperforming, not just that it is. And again, perspective matters. They've seen what works at different list sizes, how behavior changes across industries, and where brands over-email or under-educate. That experience shortens the learning curve dramatically. Where agencies can struggle is deep brand nuance early on, or reactive last-minute requests. Agency builds and optimizes the system, while in-house teams own brand tone and long-term execution. Retention benefits from systems first and ownership second. Next, let's talk about your creative team, design and video. This is the bottleneck nobody wants to admit. Internal creative teams shine at a few things though. First, brand consistency. Working on one brand day in and day out builds instinct. They know what's on brand without even thinking about it. They understand nuance that never makes it into a creative brief. Second, cultural alignment. They sit in internal meetings, they hear how leadership talks, they absorb tone, values, and subtext. That shows up in the work. And third, speed for internal needs. When leadership wants something quickly, internal creative usually turns it around faster because there's no briefing overhead. Those are real advantages. Where in-house teams break is most brands hire one designer or editor and expect a full creative department. That person is supposed to support paid ads, email, landing pages, social, and brand, all while keeping things fresh. That's not realistic. Creative today isn't about making one great asset. It's about volume, variation, and iteration. One person becomes the bottleneck, ads don't refresh fast enough, fatigue sets in, performance drops, and marketing blames the algorithm. The real issue is production capacity. So what about agencies? Agencies bring capacity, speed, and exposure. They see which formats fatigue fastest, which hooks are dying, and which angles quietly scale. That outside perspective matters. Where agencies fail is generic output without strong direction. The best model for creative teams is internal owns brand and taste, agency provides volume and testing velocity. Creative requires ownership and leverage simultaneously. Lastly, strategy and leadership. And this is important. Strategy should never be fully outsourced, but that doesn't mean agencies only advise. Strong agencies act as strategic partners. They help clarify priorities, pressure test assumptions, and identify blind spots before they become expensive mistakes. They help you think better because they've seen more. Final decisions must live internally though, but perspective is valuable. So why do brands get this wrong normally? They hire before clarity, they outsource responsibility, they think in extremes, and they confuse cheap with efficient. So to decide without ego, ask yourself, do we need ownership or speed right now? Will this role remove friction or create it? Is this strategic or executional at our stage? That's the answer. So the brands that scale cleanly don't argue about agency versus in-house teams. They design systems where ownership exists where it matters and leverage exists where it compounds. If marketing feels heavy, slow, or fragile, it's probably not a talent issue. It's a structure issue. If you want clarity on how to structure your team without overhiring or stalling growth, that's a conversation we have every single week. No pressure, no dependency, just clarity. Reach out to us today and we'll talk you through it. See you in the next one.